Hello and welcome to Give and Toke presented by Plant Ed, the show that elevates the conversation about cannabis to a higher level. I'm your host Paul, and today we welcome Dan Howard, who is the CEO of Tasmanian Botanics, an Australian licensed producer of medicinal cannabis located just outside of Hobart. Operating since 2017, Tasmanian Botanics has a mission to increase access for patients and to deter those patients from the black market by ensuring products are reasonably priced without sacrificing on quality. Dan cut his teeth in the Canadian cannabis market and brings years of experience from senior roles in other Fortune 50 companies to this role as CEO of Tasmanian Botanics. If you like what you hear on today's show, please make sure you like, subscribe, and leave a review on Apple and Spotify. You can also get in touch with us at giveandtoke.com.au or also follow us on Instagram at giveandtoke. But for now, please enjoy my conversation with Dan Howard. Dan Howard, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
An alumni of University of Guelph in Ontario. I have a soft spot. My sister actually attended University of Guelph.
Oh, amazing. Some
of my best friends from Canada are from there originally. But I would like to know, which Guelphite would you rather have dinner with? Actor Neve Campbell or NHL player Logan Couture?
Oh, I'd have to go with Neve Campbell. She, defined the 90s.
Yeah, absolute scream queen.
Yeah.
What's something everybody should know about Guelph?
Oh, Guelph it really is a beautiful city. I was so thankful to have some time there in university. I think the thing that people don't know about Guelph is that the South residence, which I lived in, gets a really bad rap because it looks like a prison, but it is by far the best place to be. And so anybody listening to this podcast who's lived there would, I'm sure, echo my sentiments. But Guelph, beautiful city, and great place to live if you're in and around Toronto. Couldn't recommend it more.
U of G represent. So we're here because you've taken me on an amazing tour of the Tasmanian Botanics facility today. I'm so grateful for that. Today, you're the CEO of Tasmanian Botanics. You have worked for some of Canada's biggest cannabis companies, and you have worked for some of North America's biggest companies, full stop. For you, how did this journey begin?
I guess getting into cannabis in general, I as you mentioned, I historically worked with larger companies and got a lot of experience with a lot of structure, high growth companies, but ones that were, relatively large and backed financially. Moving into the cannabis space was a bit of a jump for me, but I was an investor in the space back in way pre-legalization in Canada. And I was advocating always for people from an investment standpoint, like this is obviously going to be successful, as cannabis is widely loved and adopted in Canada. So as legalization progresses, obviously the business will as well. And then a friend of mine, after we worked together, put me in touch with the first employee on the recreational side for Tilray Canada, who needed a right-hand person to help them basically commercialize and launch all of the recreational portfolio across Canada. And I took a stab at it. And, that was my first taste in a truly, it was myself and my boss in a basement in Toronto. And, first day, I guess we should probably pick up the phone and call some people, I guess. And so that kind of growing that team from 2 to, well over 100 within a 2-year span. And you kind of get the urge to continue to be in those nimble, exciting experiences. And from then on, I was probably ruined for, big company life, just because that structure and that the mundaneness of knowing what you're going to do every day for the next X amount of days is, for me, just not something that excites me. It's that unknown and that endless possibility that kind of keep me going.
When did you start to see that this is something valuable for people, valuable for society?
So when I first started, obviously you hear anecdotes and about the medical benefits. I'm a personal believer that people should have the right to consume cannabis if you're an adult with the ability and rational thought to make proper decisions. You should be allowed to decide to use substances like cannabis that are largely shown to not be harmful or at least not more harmful than some of the substitutes that are out there. I've always been, in that camp. But after starting at Tilray, I had some doubts of the medical viability outside of the very dramatic treatment-resistant epilepsy. That's obvious. You see that kind of thing, and that's obvious. And then things like generating hunger in chemotherapy, I can put two and two together and see why that would work. But as I was in the cannabis, initially recreationally, the cannabis space longer, I started to understand that cannabis it's a quality of life medicine, and it's the most powerful quality of life medicine, in my opinion, that exists. And so I think a lot of people think about cannabis as a medicine and say, well, it's not a cure for anything. And that's not the point. It makes life with chronic ailments so much more livable and life more enjoyable. And it helps give people options to medicate themselves and alleviate symptoms that are treated with other drugs with really unbearable side effects. And again, I don't want anybody jumping down my throat to say it doesn't cure anything, but that alone, being able to displace a lot of really harmful substances that put people in either mental states or physical states that just aren't really tenable. And having this option, I think, it's revolutionary. And for patients that are suffering, it gives them an option that it doesn't exist in any other form.
From your appearance on the wonderful Christina McMullen's Oz Canna podcast, you mentioned that before you came to work for Tasmanian Botanics, you hadn't actually really heard of the company. So now that you're at the helm of it, what do people need to know? What is the story of Tasmanian Botanics?
Yeah, I think a pinch of serendipity, a couple kilograms of hard work, and just some time and love and energy has kind of brought us to this point in that we were founded by Tasmanian family that owns the land around the facility, which was previously a detention center. And, the decision to turn the former detention center into a cannabis cultivation facility, many trials and tribulations well before my time with different employees and consultants from America, and lots of that's more of a pub story for another day, but lots of ups and downs, successes and misses, and really got to a point where they were cultivating a fair amount of cannabis, both in greenhouse and outdoors, which was at the time still very, very uncommon. Even today, to do both at scale is pretty uncommon, and had a bit of a stumble around commercialization of the product, and perpetually had this view on Europe, but just closing in on that reality was it was very elusive for the team at the time. And for the first, again, no one had previous cannabis experience, and when I came on board, my first thing was, if we can't win in Australia, we can't win anywhere. We have a right to win here. It's an Australian company. We're not next door. We're across the ditch, but the majority of the Australian market is right here, and we can learn exactly what they want. We can speak to doctors. I don't speak German. No one else here does either. And so breaking that barrier so far away is very challenging. So we really shifted focus. And then also shifted focus from wanting to look extremely pharmaceutical and having all of our medicines be soft gels or oral liquids or sprays or other things. We shifted, it's my belief, if you don't grow good flower, if you can't grow good flower, you're not going to make other good products. And so, our focus largely shifted to flower products. And from there, it was, again, just iterating, speaking and relating with patients, relating with doctors, and continuing to try to improve our lineup of flowers, improve our lineup of other products, and introduce core products that we think can satisfy 80% of the market at a really, really economical rate that is affordable, consistent, and just reliable.
In seeing the cultivation practices here, it's obviously a really impressive facility. You guys are responsible for every step of the cultivation process, from start to finish, with the exception of irradiation. Everything else happens in-house. What do you think you guys do really well, and what excites you about the cultivation process?
I think, what we do best is trying to be really pragmatic and keep things simple across the board, everything we do. I think the more you overcomplicate things, the more opportunities for error you have, and the less you can isolate what works and what doesn't. And so we iterate quickly. And because we've done everything ourselves here, we didn't just rely on, a third-party contractor to come and set everything up for us. We can continually make changes. We can alter things. We can build our own infrastructure in the greenhouse. And so, our COO is a builder, licensed builder by trade, as is our facilities manager. We've got lots of tradespeople on site. So we're able to react quickly and change things, reorganize things. And I think that's been our biggest asset is, again, in 18 months, we've gone from having basically a dirt floor and a glass roof and no walls to having an operating greenhouse with close to 5,000 square meters today with plants growing, and it'll be double that in the next 12 months, as well as a 900 square meter processing building and another probably 1,000 square meters of GMP manufacturing space. All of that was done by us, and so that's, again, our biggest asset is to be self-reliant across the board.
There's a lot of, I guess, obviously, you're not broadcasting your location to the community, so I'm not sure how you're received in the local community, but as I drove in and saw the amount of cars here, it's clear that you guys are contributing to this community by creating jobs and things like this. How does a facility like this, when people think cannabis, they might be thinking, there goes the neighborhood.
Yeah.
How does a place like this contribute to a community?
Yeah, I think initially, again, especially before we were really commercially viable, it was pretty quiet. I think the bulk of the people working here were kind of office people or R&D people. There's 30 odd employees-ish when I came. At least 12 of them were, if not more, were administrative or R&D. They were, I'll say, white-collar jobs that weren't operationally touching. So it was a bit of a mystery what we did. As more and more people from the community have started working here, I'd go to Kohl's at lunchtime when I got here, and they'd be following me around because I obviously would smell like cannabis, and they'd be following me around the store. Now I feel they smell us coming in and they're ready to say hello, kind of thing. It's one of those things that the whole attitude has changed. And they'll ask if we're hiring. I've had people at the grocery store or the servo ask, oh, "Are you guys hiring? Oh, what are you guys doing now? Or when are you going to be on the share market?" And people are really proud to know that there's a company like Tasmanian Botanics in the area hiring people. We employ over 100 people now in a really socioeconomically challenged area. And they're good jobs, they're stable jobs, full-time jobs, and those are not that easy to come by in this area. So, now I think it was cautious curiosity before, and now it is, people are proud and excited about what we're doing here.
We've got a long way to go to kind of change minds, but it's places like this and it's work like this that does that. I think that leads really nicely into your experience in Canada and how different our markets are and how different our cannabis culture is, because I think people look around the world, we have a lot of access to Instagram images of what Canadian weed might look like, but how different are the Australian and Canadian markets, and what do the consumers here need to realize about, I would say the infancy of our market?
From a commercial perspective, I would say right now in the Australian cultivators kind of side of things, it looks pretty similar to very, very early days in Canada. I would say probably better here from a difficulty standpoint, but there were immense challenges in Canada early days. Entire greenhouses getting wiped out. Canopy locked the doors on a greenhouse and just walked away from it because it was so bad. And obviously over time, and again, I'm not going to necessarily name names, but there's some of the best products in the Australian market were grown in facilities that had massive problems, and companies that, bent rules, broke rules, got caught by Health Canada, all to just try to stay ahead of all the different problems they were having. But you give them time and they iterate and they get better and improve. And anytime you try to go from zero to, hectare scale growing in a matter of months in an industry that doesn't have institutional knowledge within the country, again, that was Canada and Australia, you're going to have, teething issues and growing pains. And so I think the Australian companies are doing a great job. I think the TGA is towing the line, and our requirements are far more strict, so our cost of failure is higher. When companies got caught hiding microbutanil in the ceiling tiles in Canada, they got a slap on the wrist, and you shouldn't be doing that. Whereas I don't think it would go quite as well here.
Hidden walls, secret rooms, things like that. They were just back in business a year later.
Exactly. And so, the only thing in our secret room is the last Tassie tiger. But the industry here is growing. I think everybody's going at it with vigor and with optimism. But our struggles are no different than any other market that has growth in a rapid fashion, and we're trying to keep up with demand in the growing Australian landscape. But from a culture perspective around cannabis, Canada just has a very different viewpoint, and it for a very long time, and depending on where you are in the country, but the West Coast, it was technically illegal, but there were, in Vancouver and other areas, there well-established cannabis retail stores when it was illegal, just on Main Street, and so operating with impunity for years. And as long as people weren't causing issue, if it's not bothering anyone, don't upset the apple cart kind of thing. And that went on for a pretty long time. And again, not to say there aren't victims to that. There's often nefarious roots to a lot of those things. But in general, the viewpoint of cannabis as a harmful substance was largely displaced a pretty long time ago, even before, legalization. And politicians were readily willing to speak about it and address it. I think the landscape here on a one-to-one basis, when you talk to people or doctors or just really anybody on a one-to-one basis, the majority will acknowledge they don't think cannabis is that harmful, or they might even say, they're fine with legalization. You get in a room of people and say, okay, now everyone who wants to have cannabis be legal, stand up, and no one will stand up, or one person might stand up. So it's more of a worrying about what others in the collective will think of you, when in reality everybody is largely aligned on the matter. So what breaks that stalemate, I don't know for sure, but it just isn't as liberally discussed amongst groups here. But I don't think it's because the population is unwilling or that different. It is more of a social construct and political construct, where towing the party line is a requirement, and voting, with your conscience is not allowed. And so that in itself creates issues. You basically have to have a party flip all at once, and that never happens. You need to have, well, not never, but it takes a lot longer. And so
you also have a higher number of political parties in Canada who are willing to kind of, go out there and take some risks on a policy level. We've got such a binary system that it makes it kind of hard to change those minds.
That's right. And, even locally, favor is won and lost locally in some of these types of things and jurisdictions. And so, again, once one area starts to crack and break, the rest will go. And it just is a matter of something needs to happen somewhere that everyone else can look and say, okay, there isn't a mass hysteria that has taken over. actually everybody seems pretty normal and happy, and tax revenue is flowing to the government instead of bikies. And once that happens, then it'll be scrambling to get their own piece of the tax revenue. And at the end of the day, it actually drives costs down, prices down. It's good for the patient or consumer. It's good for everyone except for the illicit side of things, which, again, societally, I think is a good thing.
We'll be right back. Podcast listeners regularly ask me where they can go to learn more about medicinal cannabis, and today I've got the answer: Plant Ed. When you visit planteducation.net.au, you'll find an array of class-leading courses and modules covering topics like cannabis and depression, inflammation reduction, the endocannabinoid system, side effects of use, and more. Whether you're a healthcare professional or a patient, you work in the industry, or you're just feeding your curiosity, planteducation.net.au offers both free and paid courses from experts including Dr. Dustin Sulak, Dr. John Tay, and Dr. Orit Holtzman. With over 50 hours of free educational content, make planteducation.net.au your first stop for expanding your cannabis knowledge. And for a limited time, listeners of this podcast will receive 10% off any paid courses by using the code GIVETOKE10 at checkout. And that's GIVETOKE10 at checkout. So visit planteducation.net.au to see their range of courses designed to nurture your knowledge and understanding of the power of medicinal cannabis. Go where you want with this, because I think it can come to many layers, like industry, social, personal. But what can we learn from Canada? I think there's industrial things we need to learn, and I think there's some things consumers need to learn from Canada. So generally speaking, what can we learn from what Canada's been through?
The biggest thing you can learn from Canada is that it's not a big deal. I think a lot of people were really worried, and rightfully so. There wasn't a good federal legal shift to base what was happening on. But I can say, nothing bad notably has happened. There hasn't been spikes in, automobile accidents or things like that. There's, generally people are responsible. And so when they're under the influence of something and they know they're not supposed to drive, they don't. If they're buying something at a store that's age gated and then they're told where they're able to use it, they stick to that. And the types of people who are going to smoke cannabis and drive, drink and drive, or they use other substances and drive. The type of people who are going to use it in areas where they shouldn't, drink where they shouldn't, and use other things where they shouldn't. And so adding another thing that people can do doesn't in aggregate create more people who want to do antisocial things. And so I think at the core, that's what it's about, is literally it's nothing bad has happened.
Yeah.
And except for you smell cannabis in the street. But also that's not a big deal either. And where people were like, oh, it stinks. And within 6 months, it just kind of became, it's like, you occasionally smell some cigarette smoke or whatever else smelly things are in the city that are part of city life. It just is what it is. And really the biggest thing you can learn is it's just not a big deal.
Obviously, we have a patchwork of approaches around the world. What have you observed in other markets overseas that perhaps has worked really well or, is definitely not a model to follow?
Yeah, I think there's two schools of thought. You keep it age gated at a pharmacy and keep it medical, which is, Uruguay is like that. So it's legal, anyone can buy it, but you need to go to a pharmacy and speak to a pharmacist, not unlike behind the counter medicines here. Then there's the other model, which is the Canada, US model, where there's medical and there's, adult use. And depending on the channel, how you access it is a little different, but inevitably the barrier is very low, and there is, physical in-person retail stores in cities that any adult can walk into and purchase cannabis products. Any other model is probably more restrictive than Australia is currently. So outside of Canada and the US, Australia is probably, even Germany right now, which is changing some things, the regular GPs are able and generally are willing to incorporate cannabis into a patient's repertoire, if you will, of potential solutions. Where, again, in Canada, that wasn't really the case. In the US, it isn't really the case where regular GPs are willing to prescribe or able to prescribe in any sort of volume. And in Europe, it's difficult as well, and it's a bit of a difficult, fragmented situation. So, again, Australia is getting the medical thing right. I think at some juncture, when the market gets to a certain spot, though, it needs to either, if the desire is to keep it a medically focused market, you cannot, it's going to start to, if it hasn't already, overburden GPs. Like, how much of the collective Australian GP time is spent in cannabis consultations? And is that an appropriate amount of time to be allocating something to a substance with the risk and harm profile of cannabis? Do we need to be creating these barriers that are this high? Or should it be, again, the Uruguay model where you can speak to a pharmacist or a health professional who can, see you appear to be of sound mind and body, and you're able to, lucidly be there, and you're not, drug-seeking behavior isn't present, and you're able to rationally make decisions and make that decision to dispense or not dispense on the spot. I think that is another option, which obviously significantly unburdens the medical system and allows for significantly more growth in the industry. Not to say that that's the primary driver, but that method of access would be able to allow the industry to continue to develop without overburdening things, I think. But again, even at that point, you do get to a point where people want variety, people want different things that start to expand beyond what a pharmacist would traditionally be handling from what is this active ingredient, what does this medicine do? And so in my belief, everything, everywhere, trends towards some sort of adult use market where there is people using at their own discretion for their own personal reasons. You may deem them therapeutic, you may deem them recreational, you may deem them many things, but they feel it helps them and works in their life, and they're going to use it in a responsible way. So I think just in general, in most Western countries, the momentum will carry us there at some point.
What do you make of comments about this, there being some issue with this being a pseudo-recreational market already? Do you think this is a red herring? Do you think it's as much of an issue? Do you think it's just somebody please think of the children brigade kind of coming out firing? Like, what do you think of that comment?
I think it's, you have people who are legacy users who are forced to behave and act in a certain way to acquire cannabis and speak in a certain way, in a certain language, to describe what they were looking for, to describe how they felt or wanted the medication to make them feel. And so they're being persecuted for that when they were forced down that path and forced to have to, if they didn't want to take the endone, they had to learn the language. They had to speak the language. They had to learn how to, pack a bong. They had to learn how to roll a joint. And if it was available in another format, maybe they would have taken it, but it wasn't. And so that's how they've developed their knowledge, and they've found a solution to, their issues. And so asking them or demanding they change is, I think, outside of anyone's right. And it created a bit of a different animal than traditional pharmaceuticals that are very controlled from day one of their introduction, how they're going to be taken, how they're going to be distributed, and this was left to its own devices. And so we are where we are. I also think, recreational versus medicinal is, it's a bit of a fallacy. Again, I've said multiple times, if you took a bottle of wine away from many people every night, they'd be on a Xanax. So are they using alcohol medicinally? Are they using Xanax recreationally? The distinction is not mine to make. They're using it to help them feel better, take the edge off, help them sleep, whatever their reason is. if it improves the quality of their life and they're using it in a responsible fashion, that distinction is irrelevant to me, in my opinion.
We've seen a few ideas about what an adult use market could look like in Australia. David Shoebridge from the Greens presented a certain model that was a little bit Amsterdam-y. I think was doomed from the outset. Really, it's not what I think the average user is looking for. No criticism to the model. I love that it's being tried. When I spoke to Tom Varga from Green Farmers, he sees an opportunity for these companies that have set up all these frameworks and all this infrastructure for medical cannabis to somehow be stewards of an adult use market. Do you see a role for medicinal companies to get into that space, or would you see them, as somewhat separate?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at Canada and the US, the same companies are supplying both markets. It's the same product at the end of the day. Our standards and our specifications are very strict in Australia, but I don't see any reason to make them more lax for recreational cannabis. Like, quality is quality. So I think absolutely everyone cultivating or manufacturing, for the most part, would be able to address both markets. I think that if I had to guess, a lot of the real cannabis-only store locations that are currently pharmacies, I think there would be a very, very high chance of those converting to a more adult use model or a split model, if that's allowed, just for the sake of, I think a lot of patients would move, again, given the quality is the same, a lot of them would move to an adult use access model, because if you can access the products the same, they're easier to get, you don't have to pay for a script. It just cuts out a lot of middlemen. So I think we would see a lot of that volume move over, like we have in Canada and in the US.
We're going to switch gears a little bit here and play a little quiz called Hotbox. It is a 60-second quiz where I'm going to ask you would you rather type questions, a couple about cannabis, but mostly about Canada. How's that sound?
Sounds great.
Best thing about the cannabis industry?
Unpredictability.
Worst thing about the cannabis industry?
Trolls.
Indica, sativa, or hybrid?
Whatever works best.
Nanaimo bars or beaver tails?
Beaver tails.
Doug Ford or Rob Ford?
Oh. We'll say Rob, because he's not doing any more damage.
Lakes in the summer or slopes in the winter?
Lakes in the summer.
Pacific salmon or Nova Scotia lobster?
Pacific salmon.
Maple Leafs or Senators?
Senators.
Ooh, I did not expect that. Tim Hortons or McDonald's?
Tim Hortons.
Sum 41 or Alexis on Fire?
Sum 41.
Montreal smoked meat or poutine?
Poutine.
And lucky last, describe your perfect 420.
Friends, sunshine, the Johnston Green at the University of Guelph. Good times and friends. There's not enough of either of those things.
From a cultural perspective, do you notice any negativity related to you being a Canadian here in the Australian industry?
I don't think so. I think I try really hard to learn and respect what the market wants here. I don't think it's my right to dictate what people should want or should do. I just think in general, you just always need to learn and listen before you speak whenever possible. And we've been very quiet, and I try to be very quiet and just respond to markets' demands and listen. Yeah, listen and learn. And so I think when you approach a market like that and you're humble and you just try to get better, people respect that. And I try to be pretty honest and straightforward. And those traits, I think, are pretty portable internationally. But I will say, I sometimes say the wrong words. I don't say mate nearly enough. And I will say the political landscape here from afar looks very similar to Canada, but the politicians and how they work are very, very different. And so I'm very hesitant to be the first one to put my hand up to try to dictate how that advocacy, the structure of the advocacy should go, because it's a very local thing. And I think that's probably my weakest point as far as from a leadership perspective. because we're literally on an island down here in Tassie, so getting up to Canberra or getting around to the different state capitals is an effort, and I don't leave the facility that often. But generally speaking, again, I've tried to come at it pretty humbly, and I don't tell anyone any way they should be or how the market should be here. But I do try to leverage the bumps and bruises I've got in other markets to be successful here on the terms that the local market dictates.
Let's talk about the Australian industry in general. You know, you've obviously already spoken about some of the kind of strings to the bow in terms of the quality, the high standards there in terms of manufacturing, cultivation. What do you think is the current state of the medicinal industry? We're only 8 years in. You know, what's being done really well across the board?
I think the industry is hitting stride now. I think this financial year, so starting today, I think this is an inflection year. I hope, and I really hope for patients that access continues to become better, affordability continues to become better, selection becomes better, and the power is somewhat transferred to the patients where they have more control over their own, medicinal cannabis journey. Whereas it's been largely dictated to many patients that aren't the ones that aren't vocal or enthusiasts are largely handed what the plan is, and often that's not really dictated by. It's more dictated by commercial terms than it is anything else. And so I think I look forward to a time where patients have a lot more power and leverage in those conversations, or don't need leverage, I guess I should say. They have the ability and the openness to have a conversation about what they want and then get something that suits them both economically and medically.
Full disclosure, not an ad, Mr. TGA, if you're listening. I do have some Tasmanian Botanics products in my regime of medically prescribed cannabis. It does seem to me that there is an intersection with Tasbot that is about quality and value, though. Is that a response to the market, or is that simply just a mission that you guys have, or both?
I think it's a mission that I have personally. When I came here, having witnessed, I guess it's two things. Having witnessed the Canadian market and how everyone set out to be the best craft cannabis everything, spent heaps of money, ended up with costs that were just blown right out. And as the market compressed and supply broadened, they couldn't provide product at a price that was viable. And so we've really tried to be, again, lean here. You're sitting in a room at a table we got from the local elementary school when it shut down. And a lot of things here are done very basically. We don't have a lot of fancy staff areas and things like that. And we don't have a huge suite of executives. The whole reason behind that is every investment we make is in the product. We want to be viable for a very long time. We want to be able to provide quality product to patients for a very long time. And I think the right thing to do is, if we're able to do that in a profitable way, to pass those things on to the patients, because ultimately you're the ones who are deciding who's going to win in the long run. People vote with their wallets. And so I think being fair, being equitable, and thinking about the long run and our viability, that's the reason why we focus on, cost control and ensuring that we have an economical solution for every patient out there.
I'd love to see Australian cannabis be reputable around the world the way, Barossa wine is, the way that Australian lamb is, and things like that. What investment does this industry need, from external forces, whether it be the government, whether it be private industry, to really thrive, to put us on the map?
I think it just is the ability to let companies be great. They didn't engineer that lamb. They just got really good at raising lamb. They didn't engineer that wine. They just became good at winemaking, and they realized certain regions grew different grapes well. And so Australia has a vastly varied climate. And I think if given the ability and the barriers were moved or lessened, we could try more things. We could see what is great where, and that's effectively what you need to be renowned, is to be great. And so what we need to do as an industry is allow ourselves to become great. And I think the enemy of greatness is good. And so just because we're all getting by now and, the industry's growing, if the restrictions are so, again, bringing in clones or seeds, or there's just such high barriers to these things that we just can't iterate. We can't try things. We can't do R&D in a way that other areas can with cannabis. And so if those barriers persist, it's unreasonable to expect the Australian industry to be the best in the world, when in California they can iterate strains in weeks or months, same as in Canada, where here getting one strain in might take a year to be able to grow it out and actually trial it. And so that's just in a plant business where breeding and iteration is how you become great, it just puts barriers probably far too high. It doesn't mean we can't take great genetics from other places and learn how to grow them here, but to be a leader, you have to enable leadership.
Thank you again for having me here today. It's been incredible to see the facility. What's next for TasBot?
More of the same. I think for us this year, we want to really focus on the value add products like our vape pens, our strain specific vape pens, and help advocate and drive things like that in the market, enabling patients to consume out of home or in areas that are less convenient to have flower will help further enable patients to use cannabis as an option. And it also is very, it's not as intimidating as flower can be for patients who are just getting into it. That's a big focus for us, both developing and advocating with doctors for those dosage formats, and then also just improving our offering and improving the affordability in those areas. But more than that, continuing to build out the greenhouse, another outdoor round, working on a few new cultivars. So, the grind continues as it always has here, and just, 1% better every day is the mindset.
So the final segment is called Polls of Wisdom, and this is where we try to leave the listener with one key takeaway, dinner party fact, or call to action. So Dan, what is your poll of wisdom?
Always be learning. I think the thing that's enabled me is I have an insatiable appetite to learn what's relevant to my job and be excellent at it. And so whether it was, in IT type jobs, in retail jobs, in cannabis jobs, I want to know everything about what I'm doing. I never want to be in a situation when I'm speaking to somebody and I don't understand the topics that we're in. And if I'm able to surround myself with people who know more than I do, that's a delightful time. And just continue to pick their brain, and you can always learn something in any situation, with a patient, with anything. So just, always be humble and never assume you know more than anyone, and just ask questions.
It's been a real privilege to be here today, to be in this beautiful state, in this beautiful facility. I'm without words, as you can tell. So thank you so much for having me, and thank you for being on the show.
Thanks for coming out.
Thanks for listening to Give and Toke Cannabis Conversations presented by Plant Ed. Visit planteducation.net.au and use the code GIVETOKE10 at checkout to save.